Good morning, everybody. Father Matthew here. Hope you're all doing okay. This morning, I want to talk a bit about emotions um, because this very strange time that we're going through at the moment is a funny one when it comes to emotions. I think, as I've mentioned already, I've done two funerals this week, and of course, funerals are emotional occasions. And it's been very hard to take funerals under the current circumstances. Um, it's very hard to watch people have to sit separate from others and to go through the emotions of a funeral and all the rest of it, not be able to do anything about it, or not to be able to shake their hand or give them a hug as they come out. It's very strange. And I I'm going to use the example of a couple of the recordings I've done, just because obviously that's something I'm doing a lot these days, and is really teaching me a lot actually about a lot of things. But I think before I do that, just to say that I've always been very incredibly private about my emotions, and tend not to share them very much at all, and I try at least not to display them very much. And even some of my closest friends have sometimes said to me that it's very hard to read you sometimes. And I I remember the day that my grandfather died when I was coming up to 19. Um, he had, if I remember rightly, it was a heart attack he had while he was driving his car, and he had my uncle in the car who had sort of learning difficulties, and the funny thing was that my granddad was a terrible driver. He learned to drive, apparently, if I remember rightly, while driving a tank in the army in the Second World War. And some of us used to joke sometimes that the habits never changed. Um, but when we found his car the next day, he'd managed to park, and my uncle had gone to a house to ring an ambulance, and he'd done immaculate parking, and so it was the big joke that his last parking would be so good. But I'd gone to my grandmother's house that night, and it was a Friday night, and I always used to go for lunch on a Saturday to my nan's house. And on a Friday night, I'd go for a cup of tea, and I'd jokingly say to my nan, "Can I have my usual table for tomorrow, please?" And this particular day, she said, "Oh, well, I don't know because your granddad's in hospital. He'd been taken to hospital." And so I thought, well, I'd better stay with my nan. And then I remember very clearly my uncle and great uncle coming home and sitting next to my nan and saying, it was my uncle who said, "Dad, my granddad, her husband, is gone." And I remember my nan sort of in that moment of shock saying, "Well, where has he gone to?" And then they went to assemble the family, and I think it was the first time I'd seen my nan cry, and I cried a little. Um, but as soon as everybody arrived, I busied myself with making tea and all the rest of it. And I then went to the takeaway I worked in and just said, "Would you mind if I didn't come in for my next couple of shifts because this has just happened." And and while I was walking home on my own, and when I got home and nobody was there, that's when I did my crying, and when nobody could see. And I've always been that way, and I didn't cry at the funeral or anything else, but I've always been very, very private about it. And sorry, I'm looking at the time. That's quite a long story, but I hope you'll bear with me today. Um, so yeah, I've always been very private about emotions, and there are times when I do get very emotional, and sometimes the most emotional I become is during worship. And of course, we've just had Holy Week, and we've not been able to do it in the normal way. And I get very emotional during Holy Week, especially Maundy Thursday, as I wash people's feet and as I sit watching. And then Good Friday is very emotional. Um, and you know, so it was quite similar. 'Cause on Good Friday, I recorded a version of When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, which I think I sent to you, that you'll have heard. And the first time I recorded it, I sort of did it through tears, and I think in the first version of the recording, in one of the verses where it said sorrow and love flow mingled down, my voice cracked during the word mingled, and I have re-recorded that, but it was very, very emotional. And yesterday I was in between. I had quite a busy day yesterday, but in between all the bits, I recorded a version of the Welsh hymn Ar Hyd y Nos all through the night, and I sort of created a male voice choir, recording 16 tracks individually, 4 on each part, 4-part harmony, and then a lead vocal. And it was another one that I struggled to sing. I suddenly became very emotional singing it. I suppose because it's such a beautiful hymn, and all the rest of it. And as I was going through each of the harmony parts, listening and taking out breaths and things like that, and that's important because when you record tracks separately, if you happen to breathe at a slightly different time, what you end up with is this great big sort of sound. And so I took them out, and so I listened to all the tracks individually to make sure that I got them. And on one of them, it was quite clear that I was actually struggling to sing. Voice was breaking, and obviously crying as I was doing it. And but I could have re-recorded it, you see, but I thought I'd leave it in because it was in the midst of 16 voices, so it wasn't that obvious. And you know, these things sort of give authenticity to things. And in the song I've written for my daughter that I haven't shared with you, that was a very emotional song, a very sad song, singing about not seeing her during this time of lockdown and all the rest of it. And I actually burned it to a CD and sent it to her. She's not written to me to tell me what she thought of it or rung me or anything yet, but hopefully she liked it. But again, that was a very emotional song, and you can see the emotion in the vocal track, and I think I want to leave it that way. So it's not a perfect vocal, but that sort of thing. But there's something about the authenticity of that our emotions sort of bring to things, because if we can't be moved by things, by, to use my examples, you know, by not seeing our children, you know, by losing somebody close to us, or being moved by a piece of music or a prayer or our worship, then there's something very, very wrong. I'm not really a heart person. I'm a head person more often than not. But there's something about our emotions and the authenticity that they bring, and yeah, it's hard to know what else to say about that. But this is already a long video, so I hope you didn't mind me rambling too much. Look after yourselves and each other, and may God bless you. Amen.